So today, guys, I just wanted to have a look at this new plugin by Maxime Beguin, who's a well-known person in the bricks and WP Tuts communities. He's released this plugin just a couple of days ago called Advanced Themer. The name is a little bit less descriptive than what it should be because it does a whole lot more than theming. There's a bunch of additional features. In some sense, there's maybe too many for the first release because there's a lot to cover. In fact, I tried doing this video 4 times already, and I just kept getting lost in all of the features and trying to explain them, and the video just ended up being a waffle. So what I've decided to do is not do that. Paul Charlton at WP Tuts did a tutorial a couple of days ago, or a intro to this, I should say, not a tutorial, showing what it is, what the features are. So I'm not going to go through all that again and cover that. Have a look at Paul's video. It's, as always, Paul's video is always very good. So have a look at that. What I'm going to do today is show you what I did with Advanced Themer to create a color guide using the color palettes and variables that I actually created with Advanced Themer, and where the benefits lie for that for me. So that's the basic of what I'm going to cover today. Not everything that this plugin can possibly do. Also at the end of it, I might point out a couple of things that I think, if Maxime is watching this, that I think probably could be improved, and we'll see how that goes. But I'm looking forward to the future of this plugin, put it that way. So let's have a quick look at what we're actually going to look at that I built, and that is this back end here. So I'm just going to just look at the front end of that. So this is just basically a color guide, and it's using the color palette that's created in Advanced Themer, and it's all palettes, I should say, and using variables that I've created in Advanced Themer for my borders, spacing, grid, all that sort of stuff is all created from Advanced Themer. So let's have a look at the actual content here. So if we look at the first bit of content here, so this primary color, so what I've done is I've created a block here, which is my primary color. I've created all of my elements in here, duplicated that out, made that my secondary, duplicated again, that's my accent again. My amount of time that I spent in Advanced Themer to create this, in figuring out how it works, playing with it, and ending up at this point here, was about half an hour. So it is a very good productivity plugin, and I'll show you why. So let's have a look at this first block here. So we look at this primary block here. So I've got a primary block where all I'm doing is my standard column here. And what you'll notice that on all of these inputs, there's a little V there. And that V is from Advanced Themer for variables. If you click on the V, you get a list of the defined variables. Now, by the way, in Windows at the moment, you're going to see these grayed out scroll bars. I've let Maxime know. Apparently, he uses a Mac, and you don't see this on a Mac, so it's something that he's going to work on. So if you see that, don't bother putting a bug report in because he already knows. But in here, you basically click on the V, and then you just click on the variable names that you want, and it inserts the variables for you. Then I'll show you where you set those a little bit later. So basically, I'll put a grid gap of small, okay, or row gap is smaller for there, and that's all I've done with that block at the top there. Okay, then I've got another block underneath that, which is my main color. So the main color is this first row here, and on that main color, all I've done is the switch grid here is a class I've created, and on that class, by the way, for some reason, Maxime, if you're watching this, and I don't know if this is intended, but these classes keep locking without me doing it. Now, I actually like the fact that they lock, and I don't know if you've done that intentionally or not, because it stops you from accidentally messing up your classes and forgetting that you'd selected your class when you clicked on things. I like the fact that you have to unlock it to actually change settings, but I'm not sure what the logic is in where it's locking and why. So that's something maybe you can clarify. But when we're looking at the switch grid, basically I've set it to a grid, and I've used my variable here of gap S. So just clicking on the V, and then I've used another variable, which we'll talk about a little bit later. I've created some custom variables. I've called them grid scaffolds, and I've just put 2 in there, which is a 12 column and a 6 column. So I'm using a 6 column grid, and that's given me my 6 column grid here. So I've got my standard spacing, and these are clamp spacings, by the way, so they're actually responsive. So responsive spacing, and I've got 6 columns. Okay, that is as easy as it is to create this grid. Now I could have just put the repeat 12 1FR in there, or min max 0 1FR, but this is just a simple way of doing it, because all I have to do is click on the V, and I want it to say 12 column grid or 6 column grid. Okay, I think that's really good. Okay, so that's the first one there, and then we've got a swatch, and I've used BEM naming. I always use BEM naming. Again, it's locked by itself, and on here I'm just centering the content, and I'm using my gap XS here. I think that's all I've set there, and then on my style and my layouts, I'm using those variables again, so the gap XS this time. So again, in here, you just click on the V and select the gap you want. And I think that's all I've set here. Now I've got a border and box shadow. So my border, top one, and again, I've used a variable, which is under my border radiuses, which I've called radius -s. And I've renamed these, by the way, which I'll show you in the actual theme settings. I've renamed these from what the defaults would be. Did I just click on something there? I did. Okay, so, and then we go to a swatch sample, which is a BEM element. And in my swatch sample, again, it's locked. What do we got on our here? I think I've just set, I've set the height to 50 pixels. It's grayed out because it's locked at the moment. And on the border and box shadow, I might just unlock that so you can see this a bit better. On the border and box shadow, again, radius XS, and that's all I've done from there. So that's my swatch sample. And what I've done with each of these swatch samples is, if we take the class off it, at the ID level, I've set a background, and I've just used my colors from the color palette generated by Advanced Theme, which I'll show you next. So here's my color palette here. So we end up with now each color. In this case, I've got a primary. I get a light 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then I get a dark 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm not sure why it duplicates the primary. Does the same with the action. It duplicates that for some reason, but that doesn't really matter. Okay, so what I'm doing with this is I'm setting the color of that swatch, which is block, at the ID level, so I can make these all different. Okay, then I've got a basic text, which is just nothing. It's just a basic black text for my label, and then I've got another white text label here. So these two are exactly the same. One's got black text, one's got white text, and that's so that I can check it with my contrast checker. And by the way, there's one built in to Advanced Theme. So I just click this, it's going to show me which ones work on which color. So in this case here, my white text does not work on that variation there. My black text does. We go down to this here, the black text works on that, the white text doesn't. Okay, it's not always obvious. When I look at this here, that white text looks like it'd be fine. This white text looks like it would be fine, but whatever the contrast checker that it's using, I'm not sure if it's checking for a AA rating or AAA rating, whatever it's saying that, you know, this isn't ideal for a A11Y contrast ratio. Right, so we'll just switch that back off again, and that's the swatch. Then I've got a hex label, which is just a basic text there, where in my content I've just put a ... hex ... and my swatch text is just a my swatch hex is just a class, and I'm going to use this for my JavaScript to update those with what actual color is on these swatches. And that is pretty much what a swatch is. And then all of these down here, if I go to this block here, that's just a heading block, so it's just my text here. Now with that text there, there's a few things you can do here. I've actually created just for testing, I've created a utility class called clamp font 3. And if I apply that, it's going to apply my clamp settings from Advanced Theme, AT. I'll just call it AT. It's going to be much easier. From AT, it will use that. Now, if I have a look at the actual style for that in the typography, all I've done is used my font h3 variable, which is from AT. Okay, now you could just, instead of putting a utility variable on that, you don't have to do that. I could take that variable off take that utility off there, and on the actual element, I can, in my typography, just add the variable there, and I don't have to remember what it is. It's font h3. That's going to do exactly the same thing at the ID level. Okay, so many ways you can do this. Utility classes, I think I like utility classes when it's a individual thing, like your font size or a clamp or a box shadow or something like that. I'm not so fond of utility classes when they encompass a lot of CSS. I think BIM named structures are much better for that. But if it's a single thing like your font clamp, your box shadow, your border, whatever it is, I think it's okay to use a utility for that. All right, so that's that. Now the lights, what I've got then is another block, which again, I've put my switch grid class on, which is giving me my grid with my gap S and using my variable for my 6-column grid template. So all I have to do to any of these blocks to turn them into a 6-column grid is make it a grid, select the gap I want, select the variable I want for the template columns, and that's done. All right, so these under that are just swatches, just like this first one. They're all exactly the same thing. The only thing I've done with each of these is change the background color on the sample, on the swatch sample. So each of these has their own background color. Now there is, I'm not sure whether there's a bricks issue or to do with AT, but when you're looking at these background colors here, so if I look at that color there, it doesn't tell me which one selected. It's actually, I know that it's on this one here, primary L1, but for whatever reason, it's not giving me that dot that it normally gives you for the selected color. And if I look down the bottom here, I can see the variable that's been applied, which is my primary light version 1. Or if I look at my list, even here, it's not showing me that that's the one that's actually selected. So I'm not sure what's going on with this, but whether that's a bricks thing or whether that's an AT thing. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. That's just an indicator anyway. So all of these, I've just gone that swatch there, that swatch there. I'm just setting that one to my primary light 1. Then I've got this one here. The next one here, and that's on primary light 2. That's primary light 2 as well. Then it's primary light 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5, 5, 6, 6. And there's my darks. I go to that one there. And I've got my primary D1 for dark 1 through to dark 6. And that's all I do to create that. And then I just duplicated that and then went to each of these and changed the colors that are on those. Okay. So that's as simple as that's why it's so quick to produce a color guide based on these settings, because it's all based on variables. Okay, so that's the structure for this. The only other thing that I've done here is I'm just going to collapse all this. I created some CSS code. I'm not going to go through the code. That's going to take too much. So I've got some JavaScript code here where all it does, it goes through and it finds all of the swatches, so all of these blocks here. It finds the first sample inside there. So in this case, it's that black text sample. Finds the first sample. We're getting the computed style for the background color, so that returns an RGB value by default. So we need to convert that to hex to update this label. And then we go through, this is a little bit more complex. It goes through the actual document style sheet and it finds the actual setting that we put on there. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So if I look at my swatches here, if I look at this swatch there, the background color is set to var -- primary. If I look at the next one down here, The background, oops, I didn't select it properly. That one there, it's set to primary-L-1. So that is what we want to print out here. So to get that, we have to go through, loop through the actual style sheet and get the actual name of the rule and then get the background color off that style rule. And that'll give me the original text that we actually put on that style. And then the get computed style from that will actually return an RGB value. And then we have to convert that to hex to display the value up here in hex. We could just display the RGB value, but I just preferred to put it in hex. It's just easier for me. Well, it looks better for me. Okay, so that's it. That took me half an hour to build this out. So to create a block here with my colors, duplicate that out for the other colors, and then just go through each of these and set the background color. Now, a couple of really cool things in here is if we have a look at the back, and you have to enable these features, by the way. If I go to this white block here, go to my style, and here's my background color here. Watch what happens to this swatch as I roll my mouse over these colors. The swatch is actually updating as I roll my mouse over before I even select it. So you get a hint as to what it's going to look like before you actually change it. It does the same thing with any of these classes here. So you can see that changing there. If you have a class, utility class or whatever, as you roll your mouse over, the element you've selected, you can see that class temporarily applied to the element, which again is another really good productivity feature. So I think there's some really cool things in here. There are some things that need improving still, but I think this is a cool feature. One of the things I did notice, again, this is Maxime, so I'm pretty much done with how I've created that. One of the things I did notice is that in here, when you click on these things, that wasn't too bad. Let's go to that one there, go to content, style, that's not too bad. It's going to make a liar out of me now. There's a little bit of lag when you select. See, there's a tiny bit of lag on here. And what I found is sometimes you could just see this painting a little bit quicker. It's not a big deal, but I think what's happening is it's adding all of these variables here and whatever other features, and that's just slowing down the render a little bit, but I'm not sure that that's an issue. So I won't worry about it. So the things that I do think that could be improved, let's have a look at it. Actually, no, I'm jumping ahead. Let's go back to what I created here. So this is the AT backend, and I look at the theme settings. The first thing I did was go through and rename all these. These are all named as font-h1, font-h2. I'm a stickler for BEM naming, and I think font is the block, h1 is the modifier. This is the h1 clamp. From 56 pixels to 96 pixels is an h1 clamp. So this is a h2, h3. I've just gone through and changed these all to be BEM modifier names. I didn't delete any of these. I probably will because I'm not going to use all of those. I haven't changed any of these min and max values because Maxime says it's based on this material UI font size scale. So I'm just going to leave it at that for now. In the spacing, there's a bunch of, the gap XS. So there's gap S, XS, -1, gap XS -2, gap XS -3. I got rid of all those and I just made it a simple modifier. And I just have XS, S, M, L, and XL. I got rid of all the button padding, all that sort of stuff, because I feel the more options you have, the messier your design becomes. I like to have less options that are enough to give you the scope to do what you need, but not so many that you end up with different sizes and spacing all over the place because you've got too many definitions. So I like keeping it simple with a XS, S, M, L, XL, and maybe an XXL if we need it. And that to me is a much cleaner way of doing that. The border radiuses, again, there was radius-card, radius-button, radius-whatever. I deleted all those and I just made radius XS, S, M, and L. That's my thinking, it just makes sense to me. So that's the changes I made there. Custom variables. I created my grid scaffolds, which you saw before, which I've just done a 12 column grid and a 6 column grid for now, just for this demo. There are some grids that were built into here. I actually added the second one, and I added the variable for the gap. I think by default this was 2 rem. So I'm thinking if we're going to have responsiveness, use our responsive variables for gaps as well. Now, I think, yes, sorry, the grid 3 was the only one that was in there. Now, this is based on having the breakpoint independent responsiveness. So this is based on the content. So we have a minimum content width or column width of 280 pixels. So if we can fit 3 of those with the gap on a row, then it fits all those onto a row. If 3 of these at 3 columns at 280 plus the gap won't fit on a row, it'll wrap the last item onto the next row. So that gives you a natural responsiveness. It's not to do with what breakpoint you're at. It's to do with, will your columns fit on the width that you've got to work with inside a container or div or whatever you want. It's got nothing to do with the viewport. It's to do with the actual container around your row. And I think it's a better way for me of managing your responsiveness for grids, because it doesn't really make sense to me. Let's say you've got box content. It doesn't matter what the viewport width is, it matters what the width of your content is. So this makes more sense to me. So I like this idea. I haven't used it in this demo, but I like the idea of doing that. Class importer I haven't used, resource I haven't used, builder tweaks. This is just enabling or disabling features. Settings, again, the only thing in here I'll mention is the base font size of 10, which is typical for bricks, and your clamp settings, you have minimum viewport and maximum viewport width. So when we looked at the other settings, so for example, if I go back to my spacing, I've got a min value and a max value. So a min value of 8, max value of 12. What that's saying is that 360 pixel wide viewport, our gap's going to be 8. At a 1600 or above viewport, our gap's going to be 12. So it's really the points at which you get to your minimum or maximum values is what this is all about. And in between those 2 points, it's going to scale depending on the width of your viewport. But below that, it's going to stay at the minimum. Above that, it's going to stay at the maximum. So that's what that's all about. All right. In here, what I would love to see in here, so actually one of the problems we've got here is that if I save this as a template, so if I went in there and saved this as a template, which I've already done here, and export that, and someone else imports my template, it's not going to work properly. And the reason for that is because a lot of the variables we're using here are based on settings from here. And there is no way I can see in here that you can export and import these settings. So it would be really good if you could actually export all of the settings, so the theme and colors in one set if you want to, or individually export these tabs. So if you just want your typography, have an export, get a JSON on that, import your JSON, so you can actually say, look, here's my spacing, typography, and border radiuses and custom variables for my template. So I'm going to export those, and then when you use my template, you've got to import the settings for AT as well. That would be good, but unfortunately that doesn't exist at the moment. So you have to make sure when you import a template, you're going to have to go back into AT and you're going to have to make sure you have all of those variables set manually. Okay, so that's one thing I hope Maxime has in the pipeline. Color palettes. So you saw in the guide here, I've got primary, secondary, accents, action, and shade. Okay, so in the color palettes, I've got primary, action, secondary, accent, and shade there. And it's got all of these generated here. I'm just going to settings and turn that off. So if I turn off my shades, all we have is the single colors that we created. What I'd really like to see here, Maxime, is instead of having this button over here, if you could have that switch, I should say, not button, on each color, so you can enable the shades on a color basis. So you can have some solids there. You might have black, white. You might have some solid colors that you don't want shades for. You just don't enable the shades for those colors. That would make sense. Also, transparency. So instead of just having it enable shades, if we had a transparency switch, so let's say enable that. If we had a transparency switch there as well, then we'd have 6 levels of transparency as well. So we could have our primary color here with 6 levels of transparency. We can do a black, for example, which we'll use as overlays. We might not have all the shades, but we'll just have the transparencies. We'll have 6 levels of transparency. So we might have a black and a white with transparency, but not shades. But all these other colors we've got the shades for. So that would be good if that was changed. Whether you got that in the pipeline, I don't know, but I like the idea of it. So overall, mate, I think this is awesome. I think there are some things to improve. I think that it's a great start. And I'm looking forward to exploring some of the other features that I haven't talked about. Otherwise, it's going to be a super long, super boring video, and I'll get people telling me I talk too much. So, all right, so I'm going to leave it at that. Definitely worth a look, guys. Thanks, Maxime, and look forward to what you do with this.